So in today's video, I want to talk about the overrated, underrated pendulum in the NBA in terms of rating players and, mainly star players, as role players don't get as much attention from the media and from fans, and, most people don't have such hot takes or such difference in opinions on role players. So quickly, a pendulum is just something that swings back and forth. I'm sure most of you know this, but if you don't, that's what it is. And, this happens with players in the NBA where they go from being overrated to underrated. And in this video, I'm going to take a look at some examples of how a player can become underrated or overrated and, why this happens, give some examples of players. But the first thing is just like, if you call a player overrated so much, or you hear people calling him overrated, your opinion of that player will likely decrease, and then he will become underrated as you no longer rate him as high. And then if you call a player underrated so much, then your opinion of him will increase and you will rate him higher, and then maybe he will become a little bit overrated. So that's just sort of how it works, basically. But let's look at some examples. So two examples, or just example of how a player is underrated then becomes overrated, is a player is in a small market, doesn't get as much attention, maybe isn't as flashy, doesn't have any all-star game appearances or not many. And a great example of this is Mike Conley and Drew Holiday. Both of them have been called underrated for a large part of their careers, and that is partially true because they are both great defenders, but they haven't made many all-star games, or Mike Conley hasn't made any. I think Drew Holiday has only made one. And their stats, they're okay. Both about 20-point scores, 6-7 assists, 3-5 rebounds. So those are pretty good stats. But they're not like amazing. So if you call them underrated players so much, they actually become maybe a tad overrated, just because there's a reason they haven't made the All-Star game, and their teams haven't really gone that far in the playoffs. I know Mike Conley's Grizzlies went pretty far in the playoffs with the grit and grind era with Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol, but as a general rule, they get called underrated so much that maybe they're now properly rated or even just a tad overrated. Some other examples of moving on to the next category. So we have Damian Lillard, who is a player that has become quite overrated recently, or was quite overrated, and then it sort of swung back now, and now he's probably properly rated or maybe still a tad overrated. And this, like, people were saying he's better than Steph Curry, which is just not true. And this is because, first of all, Steph was out for last season, so typically out of sight, out of mind. We forget how good he is when we're not watching him play night in, night out. And Damian Lillard was playing really well. He was carrying a Blazers team that had a ton of injuries, and he took them to the 8th seed, and he got a lot of credit for that. And it was well deserved, because that was a tough task, and that is very impressive. He was also, like, Steph wasn't there, so he was the best point guard if you don't consider LeBron and Luka point guards. And, he gets a lot of praise for that, and deservingly so, but he probably got too much praise and was overrated, so the pendulum swung that way. And then now Steph has played well to start the season. Damian Lillard has also been decent. He started a bit cold, but he's starting to pick up form. But so now the pendulum has swung back. Maybe he'll become underrated in a few months if he keeps playing well and we don't give him credit for it. But I would say right now he's probably correctly rated. He was a bit overrated before, but I'd say now he's correctly rated. The next example is a player that is just, it's hard to judge their impact either due to the situation or the type of player. And a great example of this is Draymond Green. Some people will say he's one of the best players in the NBA and he impacts the game so much and he's such a great defender. And then some people say, oh, he's only good because he's in the Warrior system and he doesn't score, he can't shoot. And, as with most things, the truth is probably in the middle. But this difference in opinion will lead to some people thinking he's really overrated and some people thinking he's really underrated. Personally, I lean to the side that Draymond is a very impactful player. His playmaking, his defense, all very important to the Warriors, both during the championship runs and right now. So I would say he's probably a bit underrated, but I'm sure you could find plenty of people who say he's overrated. So that's an example of the pendulum. Like, it's in different places for different people because, people rate him differently. Next, we have examples of just a bad performance or stretch of games and people go way overboard. And we have two great recent examples of this is Paul George and Pascal Siakam. Both struggled very much so in the bubble and the postseason, and both criticized heavily and therefore have become underrated just because so many people are saying they're overrated and they're not that good. Well, yeah, they are very good. They're both all-star players. Siakam made the All-NBA second team last season. If we talk about Paul George, obviously the playoffs wasn't great, but he's redeeming himself. This season, I believe he's averaging around 25 points a game, and he's a really good player. He's a good defender. He's a good shooter. He can create his own shot. He can play make a bit. Just a really good player in general, and he's become underrated. Siakam struggled a bit to start the season. He started to pick up form a bit more recently, and he is also a very good player, though I don't think he was maybe a bit overrated heading into the playoffs, but certainly not as bad as people are trying to say. Still a very good player, and he's probably correctly rated, if not maybe a bit underrated right now, just due to the amount of hate and people saying he's not good that he's been getting and that people have been saying. And then we sort of get the opposite of this, where they have a bad performance and they have a good performance and they become a bit overrated. A good example of this recently is Tyler Hero. Obviously, there's quite a few other factors for Hero being overrated, whether it be his swag, that he's just a rookie, that he plays in Miami, just his confidence and things like that. Has one 37-point game, and suddenly he's the best young player in the league, and you shouldn't trade him for James Harden. Obviously, that's just way overrating him. He's still a solid young player with a lot of promise, but not that good, and definitely not worthy of not trading for James Harden. Still a good young player, but one 37-point game doesn't make him better than a variety of other players who have proven it more consistently than him. And then Jamal Murray, I think Jamal Murray might be a tad bit overrated right now, just because he had a really good bubble run where he was averaging 26 points a game and he was on top of the world. And now he's fallen down back to earth a bit, and he's about almost at 20 points a game, I think. So just a little bit overrated right now, just because he did have such a good performance and he was getting rated so highly. But I haven't seen him get too much attention recently, so maybe he'll become underrated again if he picks his performance up and starts playing like he did in the bubble again. So now let's look at a few all-time examples. I have two players here, Scottie Pippen and Reggie Miller. Let's start with Pippen. Pippen has been hailed as the most underrated player of all time, so much that I think he's actually become a little bit overrated. Now, Pippen was a really, really good player, but was never the first option on a championship team. His half-court offense wasn't great. I'm not saying he's not a good player. He's a really good player, really good playmaker, defender in transition, but just a tad bit overrated, as he did have the benefit of being the second option for almost his whole career. So because people have been saying he's the most underrated player of all time, he's become a tad overrated. And we go to Reggie Miller, who, it's kind of predictable, and you can see the reasoning of why people have been calling him overrated post-retirement. was really only a shooter and a scorer, didn't do much else on the court, wasn't a good defender, and then his points per game don't jump off the page to you. I think in his best regular season average 24 points a game. So it makes sense that people are calling him overrated, but people have been calling him overrated so much post-retirement that he's actually become a little bit underrated, in my opinion. One of the clutchest players in the NBA, always raised his game to be a superstar when he faced off against the biggest teams, like in those Knicks series. Was really good. Also, his 25 points a game in the playoffs, those are more like 30 points a game, just because of the tougher defenses and the possessions, there being less possessions and the slower pace. So he's a player who I think has become maybe a little bit underrated. So that's about it for this video. Just players can become the overrated, underrated pendulum continuously swings back and forth, and players can become overrated very quickly and underrated very quickly just by one performance or just a stretch of games. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys.